Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, we are continuing our ongoing coverage of the war between the Russian Federation and the Ukraine. Now, today, we want to look at casualties. We want to take a look at casualty assessment. Specifically, we want to look at what is happening with the Ukrainian military. Now, right now, there is a block on reporting in terms of the daily, monthly casualty rates of Ukrainian forces. It is a state secret, as it is in Russia as well. So it's very difficult, but not impossible, to calculate ongoing losses. Now, in terms of Russian losses, the Ukrainians are reporting losses that are simply not possible. Hundreds upon hundreds of thousands of Russian troops they allege killed or wounded. And the big number that is just completely impossible, physically impossible, is the amount of tanks. These are main battle tanks. These are not just armored infantry fighting vehicles, but the Ukrainians report to have destroyed, captured, damaged up to and over 8,000 Russian main battle tanks. The Russians did not and have not possessed such a number of main battle tanks to even be destroyed. Impossible. Not possible. Now, what has been going on in Ukraine, where we can kind of judge the intensity of the fighting, is the burial of personnel. This is one area that has been difficult and challenging for the Ukrainian state to prevent from reporting. And we're going to have a look at that today. Now, when you look at casualty estimates, right now, the Ukrainians generally report both killed and wounded on the Russian side. But today we're going to look at some hard numbers in terms of just how many Ukrainian forces are being killed or wounded daily. And we can also look very closely at some of the units that have also sustained major casualties. So we're going to go over to this site here. This is a UA losses, and this is a fairly good site in terms of reporting the casualty figures of Ukrainian forces. Now, you'll notice right off the bat, you'll have the total death records of 55,624, and they calculate this per month or per day on this site. You can also look here, the average age at death was almost 38. Well, it was 38 years old. That is a fairly significant number in terms of the age of the average Ukrainian soldier that is dying. So that tells us that a very older population is fighting in this war. And generally speaking, the younger generation is being sheltered and removed from this conflict. This is a war fought by Gen X and millennials. Gen Z is escaping this conflict for the most part in the Ukraine. Now, is that a symptom of Western culture leaking into the Ukraine? I would say quite possibly. And look, we've talked about this before in terms of having discussions about the wherewithal of Gen Z and the newer generation, the current generation of 18, 19, 20s, and 21-year-olds. And I think the Ukrainians right now are seeing a symptom of that Western culture in which they do not want to go to war. Now, again, the death records here, if you look at this, 55,624, that is incomplete. So, again, these are confirmed names and burials. These are not missing soldiers. Each one of these numbers corresponds to an actual human being that has been confirmed killed or wounded. Now, there are thousands upon thousands more missing and presumed dead, and those are not being calculated in this number. So if there is a Iskander missile strike or a large-scale artillery strike in which you can't even quantify the number of casualties and you can't identify the dead, or an area was overrun by Russian troops and there's no way to calculate the casualty levels, then of course that number is not going to be calculated on this website. Now, if we go back to what's very interesting, if we go back to the very beginning stages of the conflict, and we're going to do that right now to show you what the first month of this war looked like in terms of casualties and burials for Ukrainian troops. So we're going to go back to February 24th, 2022. And then we're going to go back to essentially 1 month. And we are going to move all the way to March 31st. So 1 month and a couple of days. And we're going to hit the search button. And for whatever reason, it has decided not to work currently. Let's see if it updates. And it's not working. So when I did this before, it did work, and it calculated around 3,400 Ukrainian troops killed in that first month of conflict. Let's see if we can fast forward it to kind of the present time and see if that updates. And yeah, it finally updated and gave us the number there. That went way into the future. So we're going to look at June 1st, 2024. And we're going to go to the end of June 2024. And these are probably the most recent casualty estimates. Again, June 1st, 2024 to June 30th. And then let's hit search. 463 burials of Ukrainian forces. Now, the prior month is even more interesting. So if we go back to May 1st to May 31st, and when we update, 1,202 Ukrainian troops killed in the month of May, and they were buried in the month of May. Now, what you also have to do is essentially you have to look at this number, 1,202, and then you have to add or multiply that times 3, anywhere to 7. And that's going to give you the number of Ukrainian troops wounded. So in the month of May, I would say it's fairly accurate to say that approximately 1,500 Ukrainian troops were killed. Again, we don't have a number of missing, presumed killed, that are calculated into this number. And then another estimated 3,000 to 4,000 Ukrainian troops wounded. So again, you're probably looking at about 4,000 to 5,000 Ukrainian casualties in the month of May alone. Now, what you can also do with this website is actually go into the military units. And this is going to give you the losses per military unit to the corresponding soldier that was buried. So you can see here the unit that has sustained the most casualties throughout the Ukrainian conflict, and this is over the course of the last few years, is the 24th Separate Mechanized Brigade. 888 Ukrainian soldiers confirmed killed. Now you also again have to add probably 100 to 200 that are missing, and an additional probably in the area of about 3,000 that have wounded. So over the course of the conflict, this unit has lost nearly 100% of its soldiers over the course of the conflict, and it has obviously been reconstituted, but those are the kind of losses you're seeing. Now what's interesting is you can actually dig deeper and kind of go down and look at individual units, such as the 95th Separate Airborne Assault Brigade, but you can also see rear area units that were also struck as well, and you have to go further down into the total in terms of the different military units that are being utilized. So here the 26th Separate Artillery Brigade, 60, 27th Rocket Artillery Brigade, 57. So these, in all likelihood, again, are counter battery engagements and or Iskander strikes or Lancet strikes against these specific units. This is interesting right here. The 91st Separate Operational Support Regiment. So in all likelihood, this is a rear area unit. Now, this was probably some sort of rear area strike. Now, let's see. Let's actually go into if it pulls up the data. Again, it's been acting a little slow of late, and it's been difficult to ascertain. But if you can go in and you can look at the date of each individual soldier that was KIA'd, you can then dissect maybe what occurred, and I'll let you, the viewer, do that at a later date. Obviously, it's acting up and it's not letting me in specifically to some of these tabs, but we'll continue to go down, and what will eventually happen is this is interesting, the 169th Training Center. So again, this is a rear area strike. The 169th Training Center, in all likelihood, is not deployed to the front line. So this means that a rear area Russian strike probably caused these casualties at some point. And we'll continue to go down as well, because what I want to do is eventually get to the strikes on the air defense units. These are also calculated in this as well. So right here, 14th Radio Engineering Brigade, that is a rear area unit. And it has really everything. The Sumi border detachment. And I'm very surprised that this site is able to do what it does. I know the Ukrainian military is not at all happy with this site whatsoever. This would be a rear area unit. So this is the 19th Missile Brigade. Again, this is probably a HIMARS unit, possibly a Tochka unit as well, a surface-to-surface missile battery that will usually operate 40, 50 kilometers behind the line of contact. (831st Tactical Aviation Brigade), 11 casualties. And now we're finally getting into the kind of the air defense realm. And it's timed out on me. Let's go back. 38th Anti-Aircraft Missile Regiment, 11 casualties. And then we're kind of also getting into the territorial defense battalions. These are independent battalions. 39th Tactical Aviation Brigade, 10 casualties. Let's see if it pulls up the 23rd Separate Public Order Protection Brigade. And I imagine this is going to time out as well. For whatever reason, it's not allowing me into these individual sub-brackets of the actual unit. 156th Anti-Aircraft Missiles Regiment, 10 casualties. And this let me into, the 23rd Separate Public Order Protection Brigade. And you can go in and you can look at the actual death date and at times try to extrapolate individual engagements of what may or may not have happened, and it's kind of obviously difficult to do this on this one. And then we'll go back. Central Missile and Artillery Directorate. Again, this is going to be a rear area strike. This was a command node. 9 dead. '30th Division of Surface Ships. 8. Let's see if we can actually get into that. Give us an idea of when. So if you look here, these are all March 3rd of 2022. So that's telling us that in all probability that this was a vessel, a Ukrainian naval vessel in Odessa, or a command and control facility possibly, that was hit on March 3rd, 2022, causing the corresponding casualties. 548th Separate Radar Company. And again, if you go in and you look at these individually, and it may or may not load. So this is a radar unit, right? And you can look here, the actual KIA burial date, March 12th. So this unit, or this subunit of the 548th Separate Radar Company, was apparently hit by a rear area attack by Russian forces, causing the corresponding casualties. The 143rd Joint Training Center, rear area attack, 7 dead. See when that occurred. July, March, September. So a variety of dates. '15th Transport Aviation Brigade. Is interesting. Unified Field Communications Center of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of the Ukraine. And right now it's not loading. And right now we're getting into more of these smaller rear area units as well. But I think you, the viewer, kind of gets the idea of exactly what we're looking at, and then obviously the amount of casualties that are being taken. And if we go back and we look at U.S. estimates of Ukrainian casualties, and quite some time ago the U.S. intelligence agencies believe that something around 70,000 Ukrainian troops had been killed at one point. And again, these are all different. This is kind of interesting. But this would then correspond to that number in terms of 55,000 killed. Because again, we have to also calculate the number in which there simply was no burial at all. But again, each month right now we're looking at probably about anywhere from 500 to 1,500 Ukrainian troops being killed in action. But again, these are just the actual burials, so it's probably a certain percentage higher than what we're actually seeing on these numbers. So again, that total number. But feel free to pull up this site, check it out, and do your own research. But the fighting continues, and very heavy fighting is continuing along all areas of the main front line of the ongoing conflict. The Russian offensive operations continue. The Russians are continuing to drive forward and take ground. Now, as I talked about before, how can you calculate that the Ukrainians are taking more casualties than the Russians? And it's real simple. The Russian Air Force is essentially the third largest air force in the world. The Ukrainian Air Force is almost non-existent, with just a dozen to 24 operational aircraft that are not operating in any significant way against Russian forces, whereas the Russian Air Force is dropping hundreds of glide bombs, if not thousands of glide bombs per month on Ukrainian forces. And this also, you have to take into account attack helicopters, direct, indirect operational missions by the Russian artillery forces, multiple launch rocket forces. So the sheer volume of fire, the amount of munitions that the Russians are firing downrange, to include direct air support missions, ground support missions, what have you, rear area strike missions, are far, far much larger in scope and scale than what the Ukrainians are able to do. So inherently, that is going to cause many more losses to the Ukrainians. Now look, the Russians are not right now conducting massive ground offensive operations. They're slowly pushing forward, and they're using their air power. They're using their long-range fire missions to degrade and destroy the Ukrainian military. And that's what's happening. So the likelihood that Russian casualties are higher than Ukrainian casualties, I would say at this point, is very dubious at best. The numbers that the Ukrainians are reporting in terms of the 8,000 main battle tanks and hundreds of thousands of Russian troop losses are simply impossible. Incredibly, incredibly unlikely. So it's just important to note that. Now, obviously, the body politic here in the United States is, or has the possibility of changing. Obviously, we're watching what's happening right now in the United States, and I could do a whole other video on that, because it is a lesson in insanity, what is happening right here in the United States. But eventually, that is going to have an impact on this conflict in some way. Look, the ability for the United States to continue to supply the Ukrainian military with weapons and money at some point is going to get cut off. Is it going to be in 4 months? Is it going to be in a year? It's hard to say, but it is going to happen. And that's going to have an impact on the conflict itself. And I will do another video here soon on what is happening here in the United States, go over some possible theories of what's going to happen in the future. Obviously, we're watching this very, very closely. So that does it for today. More to come. Thank you for joining us. As always, have a good day.